Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, August 24th, 2022. President Joe Biden announcing college student debt cancellation, up to $10,000 per borrower, up to $20,000 for those who use Pell Grants, applying to those who make under $125,000 a year. President also extending the pause on repaying federal student loans until the end of this year. He says it's the last extension. The latest pause was scheduled to end August 31st. It's been in place since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Democratic candidate wins the congressional special election in New York. We'll hear from Congressman-elect Pat Ryan and from a Republican strategist about what Pat Ryan's focus on abortion rights during the campaign means for the November elections. Plus, longtime Democratic Congressman Gerald Nadler defeats another veteran member, Democrat Carolyn Maloney, in a primary. And the U.S. announces it's sending Ukraine another $3 billion in military aid with a focus on long-term security as Ukraine today celebrates its Independence Day, which falls 6 months to the day since Russia's invasion. President Biden tweeting today, in keeping with my campaign promise, my administration is announcing a plan to give working and middle-class families breathing room as they prepare to resume federal student loan payments in January 2023. He attached a graphic with the details under the heading Forgiving Debt, $20,000 if you went to college on Pell Grants, $10,000 if you didn't receive Pell Grants. Forgiveness only applies to those earning less than $125,000. And he writes, student loan pause extended one final time through December 31st, 2022. And under the heading Payment Based on Income in this graphic, he writes, if you have undergraduate loans, you can cap repayment at 5% of your monthly income. President Biden speaking today at the White House.
My campaign for president, I made a commitment. That would provide student debt relief. And I'm honoring that commitment today. Using the authority Congress granted the Department of Education, we will forgive $10,000 in outstanding federal student loans. In addition, students who come from low-income families, which allowed them to qualify to receive a Pell Grant, will have their debt reduced $20,000. Both of these targeted actions are for families who need it the most. Working and middle-class people hit especially hard during the pandemic, making under $125,000 a year. If you make more than that, you don't qualify. No high-income individual or high-income household on top of the 5%, in the top 5% of incomes, by the way, will benefit from this action, period. In fact, about 90% of the eligible beneficiaries make under $75,000 as family. Here's what that means. If you make under $125,000, you get $10,000 knocked off your student debt. If you make under $125,000 a year and you received a Pell Grant, you'll get an additional $10,000 knocked off that total, for a total of $20,000 relief. 95% of the borrowers can benefit from these actions. That's 43 million people. Of the 43 million, over 60% are Pell Grant recipients. That's 27 million people who will get $20,000 in debt relief. Nearly 45% can have their student debt fully canceled. That's 20 million people who can start getting on with their lives. All this means people can finally crawl out from under that mountain of debt, to get on top of their rent and their utilities, to finally think about buying a home or starting a family or starting a business. And by the way, when this happens, the whole economy is better off. In the coming weeks, the Department of Education will lay out in detail a short and simple form to apply for this relief, along with information when this application process opens. By resuming student loan payments at the same time as we provide targeted relief, we're taking an economically responsible course. As a consequence, about $50 billion a year will start coming back into the Treasury because of the resumption of debt. Independent experts agree that these actions taken together will provide real benefits for families without meaningful effect on inflation. Let's be clear. I hear it all the time. How do we pay for it? We pay for it by what we've done. Last year, we cut the deficit by more than $350 billion. This year, we're on track to cut it by more than $1.7 trillion by the end of this fiscal year, the single largest deficit reduction in a single year in the history of America. And the Inflation Reduction Act is going to cut it by another $300 billion over the next decade because Medicare will be paying less for prescription drugs, and over $1 trillion we added out for the next 2 decades. The point is this: there is plenty of deficit reduction to pay for the programs, cumulative deficit reduction to pay for the programs many times over.
President Biden at the White House this afternoon, standing beside him, the Education Secretary Miguel Cardona. As the president was leaving after his prepared remarks, a reporter asked him about another criticism of his plan.
President, is this unfair to people who paid their student loans or chose not to take out loans?
Is it fair to people who, in fact, do not own multi-billion-dollar businesses if they want these guys to give them all a tax break? Is that fair? What do you think?
What about people who paid their loans, though, struggled to pay their loans, and now others don't have to?
President Biden at the White House. He was also asked today whether he had any advance notice of the FBI's plans to search former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida a few weeks ago, looking for those White House documents, some marked classified. President Biden saying, "I didn't have any advance notice, none, zero, not one single bit," which is what the White House has been saying. More on the student loan relief plan. Response from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California. She writes, President Biden's bold action is a strong step in Democrats' fight to expand access to higher education and empower every American to reach fulfillment. By delivering historic, targeted student debt relief to millions of borrowers, more working families will be able to meet their kitchen table needs as they continue to recover from the challenges of the pandemic. Importantly, this action will help those most in need, easing a financial burden disproportionately harming women and people of color. That from Speaker Pelosi. From the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, he writes, Washington Democrats have found yet another way to make inflation even worse. Reward far-left activists and achieve nothing from millions of working American families who can barely tread water. President Biden's student loan socialism is a slap in the face to every family who sacrificed to save for college, every graduate who paid their debt, and every American who chose a certain career path or volunteered to serve in our armed forces in order to avoid taking on debt. This policy is astonishingly unfair. Senator McConnell goes on, the median American with student loans already has a significantly higher income than the median American overall. Experts who studied the similar past proposals found that the overwhelming benefit of student loan socialism flows to higher earning Americans. That from Senator McConnell. Congressman Pat Fallon, Republican from Texas, saying something similar in an interview on Newsmax TV.
This is patently unfair and it's un-American because many, look at our skilled laborers. A lot of them didn't attend four-year colleges. They attended trade schools, and they had to pay their loans back, or they had to pay their way as they went. And what about all of the students that did have student loans? I only had a minor one because I was fortunate enough to be on a scholarship in university, but I paid that back in full. It sets a horrible precedent, and it doesn't teach these young people that when you make a choice, you made a conscious choice to borrow money to attend a four-year university, you need to pay that money back. You could have gone to a junior college for a couple of years and then transferred to a state school. Nobody told you how to go to a high-priced private school and get a four-year degree in philosophy, so now you're serving me lattes at the Starbucks. That's a choice you made, and you have to face the consequences.
Congressman Pat Fallon, Republican from Texas, on Newsmax. That was on Tuesday when President Biden's plans announced today on student loan forgiveness were known. Derek Johnson, president of the NAACP, in an op-ed for CNN calling for more debt relief for students, at least $50,000. He writes, Black Americans have been disproportionately devastated by student loan debt. 4 years after graduating, they hold an average of almost $53,000 in debt, almost double the $28,000 average white Americans hold. And they typically end up owing 6% more than they initially borrowed, while white borrowers owe 10% less. Canceling just $10,000 of debt is like pouring a bucket of ice water on a forest fire. It hardly achieves anything, only making a mere dent in the problem. That was part of the op-ed from Derek Johnson, president of the NAACP. President Biden, during his remarks, mentioned that the authority to cancel this debt was given to the education secretary. NPR, with a Q&A on this, says, can a president even do this without support of Congress? They write, perhaps anticipating legal pushback, the Biden administration published its legal reasoning in a memorandum. At the same time, it announced the debt cancellation package. The memo says the HEROES Act, first enacted after the September 11th attacks, that's back in 2001, gives the education secretary the power to grant relief from student loan requirements during specific periods, think wartime or a national emergency. There's a question about this today at the White House briefing to the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre.
I do know that there have been concerns that the plan could be struck down in courts in some ways. This is even something that the Democratic think tank Third Way came out saying. And my question is for you all, what preparation is there into thinking people will apply for this program and they could be stuck in some legal limbo?
Well, look, and Ambassador Rice talked about this, that this is what the legal authority that we took is pretty much consistent with the HEROES Act, right, which is what she talked about, which authorizes the Secretary of Education to take certain actions. He believes they are necessary to ensure borrowers not placed in a worse position financially due to a national emergency like the COVID-19 pandemic. So that is the act, that is the legal authority that was given to the Secretary of Education to do this. We are confident in that legal authority, and any other further specific questions on that, I would refer you to Department of Education.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, referring to Ambassador Rice, that's the current domestic policy advisor, Susan Rice, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. This is Washington Today. Now to the results of Tuesday's elections. This from the New York Times. Pat Ryan, a Democratic county executive in New York's Hudson Valley, has won a special House election on Tuesday in a contest that was seen as a potential test of the impact that the recent Supreme Court decision on abortion might have on the midterm elections. The result of the closely watched race, which was considered a toss-up, will keep the swing district seat formerly held by now Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado under Democratic control. Mr. Ryan was able to keep his early lead, ultimately winning 52% of the vote to his Republican opponent, Mark Molinaro's 48%. Congressman-elect Pat Ryan speaking to his supporters Tuesday night in Kingston, upstate New York.
I want to thank all of you. I want to thank this community. This is where I was born and raised in this city. This is where I proudly graduated Kingston High School, where I graduated West Point, where we're raising our family. This community has always had my back, and I am so honored to now get to return that spirit and that favor. Jillian's fired up. So I'm going to be brief because I know it's late, but we got to savor this for a moment, right? 3 months ago, we got in this race. Unexpectedly, certainly unexpectedly. And from the beginning, people counted us out. The early polls had us down 14 points. Don't forget that. A lot of people counted us out. But we got in this race because the foundations of our democracy were and remain under direct threat, and that is deadly serious. And in the face of those threats, we took clear, strong stances to stand up for fundamental rights and freedoms for people in this community, in this district, and in this country. When the Supreme Court ripped away reproductive freedoms, access to abortion rights, we said, this is not what America stands for. As more and more kids are getting gunned down by the same weapons I carried in combat, we said, this is not what America stands for.
Pat Ryan, Tuesday night after winning the special election in New York's 19th Congressional District. He'll be serving out the remainder of the term through January. The Hill newspaper writing, Democrats are coming off a special election win in New York with a fresh burst of energy and a sense that the 2022 midterm elections might not deliver the kind of devastating blow to their House majority that they have long feared. But Kellyanne Conway, former pollster and former counselor to former President Donald Trump, has a different take. She was on Fox News Channel today.
This is a district that went for Obama, then went for Trump, then went for Biden. It has had Republican members like John Faso and Nan Hayworth, and now it's had a Democratic member. Also, Ryan has to be there for about a hot minute during the recess and then defend the seat all over again, since this is a Democratic retention seat, John. The predecessor is now running for lieutenant governor for re-election in New York. But look, I think it does tell us one thing, that the Democrats will probably look at this as a successful blueprint for mostly running on abortion, and probably a little bit of climate, maybe throw some gun stuff in there, although not in New York 19, they can't do that. And so, if the Democratic Party wants to be the party of abortion that talks to women only from the waist down and not the waist up, where our eyes, ears, hearts, brains, and mouths are, bring it. That's my message to them. Planned Parenthood, it was reported last week, will spend $50 million, 50, on some Senate races across this country. So if the Democrats have nothing to say, one thing caught my eye in the Fox News poll from last week. Among independents, they favor the Republicans on crime by double digits, on inflation by double digits, on the opioid crisis by double digits, on the economy overall and the border all by double digits. They favor the Democrats on abortion and on climate, but by single digits. So I think those independent swing voters across the country who don't necessarily turn out for a special election, they're going to have a say at the ballot box. Right now they're aligning with Republicans, but Republicans have to have a message of their own to be able to go from the difference between 15 seats and 50 seats in the fall is exactly that, having your own message.
Kellyanne Conway, former pollster, worked mostly for Republicans, former counselor to former Republican President Donald Trump, today on Fox News Channel about that special election win by the Democratic candidate in New York's 19th Congressional District on Tuesday. Another very closely watched congressional race in New York on Tuesday was in New York City, the 12th Congressional District, where the new post-census redistricted boundaries put two 30-year incumbent Democrats in the same district running against each other, Gerald Nadler and Carolyn Maloney. Gerald Nadler won 55% of the Democratic primary vote to Carolyn Maloney's 24%, and a third candidate, Suraj Patel, got 19%. Gerald Nadler thanking his opponents while celebrating the victory Tuesday night.
I've spoken this evening with Congresswoman Maloney and Mr. Patel, both of whom have graciously conceded. And I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge each of them. First, Mr. Patel Suraj. Mr. Patel. Suraj is an exceptionally bright and committed young leader, and this race was made stronger for his candidacy. Our city needs voices like his, pushing its leaders to meet the needs of tomorrow. Carolyn Maloney and I have spent much of our adult lives working together to better both New York and our nation. I speak for everyone in this room tonight when I thank her for her decades of service to our city. Now I stand before you tonight deeply humbled to be your Democratic nominee for New York's 12th Congressional District. I'm humbled by the way we worked together to achieve this victory. We won with votes from the East Side and the West Side, from Gramercy and Riverside, and with the hard work of New Yorkers young and old. We built a coalition made up of stagehands in Chelsea and nurses in Yorkville, and yes, maybe a professor or two on the Upper West Side. I'm humbled that so many New Yorkers found themselves moved by our shared belief in principled progressivism, and that I will return to Congress with a mandate to fight for the causes so many of us know to be right.
Congressman Gerald Nadler, Democrat from New York, his victory party Tuesday night in Upper Manhattan after winning the Democratic primary for re-election in the 12th Congressional District. Winning that primary means he's a virtual shoo-in to win the general election. The Cook Political Report's Partisan Voter Index, they call it the PVI, for that congressional district is plus 34 for Democrats, overwhelmingly Democrats registered in the district. Gerald Nadler and his main competitor in Tuesday's Democratic primary, Carol Maloney, both first elected to Congress in 1992, both risen to chairs of major committees. Carol Maloney thanking her competitors in her concession speech Tuesday.
I have called Congressman Nadler to congratulate him on his victory. He is a distinguished member of Congress. I share his progressive values, and I wish him every success. I hope Mr. Patel's efforts will inspire other young people to get engaged, to volunteer, and to run for office and push changes that we need.
Congresswoman Carol Maloney conceding Tuesday night in that Democratic primary. During the campaign, she said just about a week ago in a TV interview, there's an old boys network that sticks together and they do not let women in. And Tuesday night, she spoke of that again.
I am proud to have followed in the footsteps and stand on the shoulders of the strong New York women who opened doors and took on the tough battles. Shirley Chisholm, Bella Abzug, and Geraldine Ferrara, to name just a few. These heroic women fought sexist systems and misogyny that continues today, as we know from my own campaign. These pioneering women and others were often the first women to be elected in their districts to be on a national ticket. They fought for equality, and they will be remembered and enshrined for future generations, thanks to the bill I authored creating the National Women's History Museum on the National Mall to be part of the Smithsonian. Together, we must move forward and build on their legacies, continue to open doors, end all forms of discrimination, and smash glass ceilings. We must continue to be unbought and unbossed, a Shirley Chisholm campaign slogan, and remind people again, a woman's place is in the House of Representatives, as coined by Bella. If there is one important lesson to be learned in Congress, it is that when women are at the table where decisions get made, the menu of issues expands and the agenda changes to include things that directly affect our lives, our children, and our families.
Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, Democrat from New York, Tuesday in Manhattan after losing the Democratic reelection primary against another veteran member, Gerald Nadler. And the Hill newspaper has this: the race to replace Congresswoman Maloney as the leading Democrat on the Oversight and Reform Committee is already heating up, with at least two senior Democrats vying for the top spot in the next Congress. Stephen Lynch of Massachusetts, Gerald Connolly of Virginia quickly announced their intent to seek the powerful seat on Wednesday, just hours after Maloney lost her primary. A story from AP. Congressman Charlie Crist won the Democratic nomination for governor in Florida, setting him up to challenge Governor Ron DeSantis this fall in a campaign that the Republican incumbent sees as the first step toward a potential White House run. In selecting Crist on Tuesday, Florida Democrats sided with a candidate backed by many in the party's establishment who viewed him as the safest choice, even after he lost his previous two statewide elections. The 66-year-old moderate, who served as Florida's Republican governor a decade ago, hopes to appeal to voters in Florida's teeming suburbs as Democrats seek to reverse a losing pattern in a state that was recently seen as a perennial political battleground. That from Associated Press. Here's Charlie Crist with a victory speech Tuesday night in St. Petersburg.
You know this as well as I. The stakes could not be any higher for this election. Our fundamental freedoms are literally on the ballot, my friends. A woman's right to choose on the ballot. Democracy on the ballot. Your rights as minorities are on this ballot. That's what's at stake in this election. Make no mistake about it, because this guy wants to be president of the United States of America, and everybody knows it. However, when we defeat him on November 8th, that show is over. Enough. You know, I'm sad to say I no longer recognize the leaders of the Republican Party. They're extremists. They want to turn back the clock on our freedom. They're trying to undermine our democracy in ways no one could have ever imagined. That stops here. That stops now. And it stops with our Florida.
Charlie Crist on Tuesday night. He's currently a Democratic congressman, former Republican governor of Florida, after winning on Tuesday the Democratic primary to run for governor now as a Democrat. He beat the agriculture commissioner in Florida, Nikki Fried, 60% to 35%. The incumbent governor, Ron DeSantis, ran unopposed to get the nomination for re-election. Governor DeSantis joining Tuesday other Republican candidates for office at a victory party in Hialeah, Florida.
And at the end of the day, we are not going to let this state be overrun by woke ideology. We will fight the woke in the businesses. We will fight the woke in government agencies. We will fight the woke in our schools. We will never, ever surrender to the woke agenda. Florida is the state where woke goes to die. So we've got a lot of work. Don't let anyone tell you it's going to be easy over the next 2.5 months. They're going to throw everything they have at us. Obviously, we're not just running against a political party or candidate. We're also running against national corporate media, who's going to do whatever they can to derail Florida's progress. And yes, we do have Top Gov lessons on battling corporate media. Check it out if you want to see it. And you ain't seen nothing yet on that score. But it's not going to be easy. But you know what? This state is worth fighting for. Our country is worth fighting for. So put on the full armor of God and take a stand against the left schemes. Stand firm for truth.
Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican from Florida, Tuesday night at a victory party with other Republicans. In his 10-minute speech, they're not mentioning his re-election opponent, Democratic Congressman Charlie Crist, by name. Newsweek reporting the most recent independent polling in the race found DeSantis leading Crist by 8 percentage points. Republican governor won 50% of support from respondents in a University of North Florida poll conducted from August 8th through 12th, while Crist secured only 42% of the vote. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 59, NASDAQ up 50, and S&P up 12. And an update on the health of First Lady Jill Biden. White House says that she has tested positive now for COVID-19 again in an apparent rebound case after she initially tested negative over the weekend. White House says that President Joe Biden continues to test negative. The First Lady's Deputy Communications Director, Kelsey Donahue, said that she has experienced no reemergence of symptoms and will remain in Delaware, where she has reinitiated isolation procedures. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Thursday on C-SPAN Radio, live at 2 p.m. Eastern, the head of the Justice Department Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention talks about violent crime committed by children at a seminar hosted by the Sentencing Project. And live, Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, a panel on how court decisions are shaping U.S. immigration policy in the absence of recent action by Congress, hosted by the Bipartisan Policy Center. Listen to C-SPAN Radio on 90.1 FM in the D.C. metro area, streamed at cspan.org, or on your smart speaker, say, play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. A statement from President Joe Biden today reads, "On behalf of all Americans, I congratulate the people of Ukraine on their Independence Day. Over the past 6 months, Ukrainians have inspired the world with their extraordinary courage and dedication to freedom. They have stood resolute and strong in the face of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And today is not only a celebration of the past, but a resounding affirmation that Ukraine proudly remains and will remain a sovereign and independent nation." President Biden's statement goes on, "The United States of America is committed to supporting the people of Ukraine as they continue the fight, defend their sovereignty. As part of that commitment, I'm proud to announce the biggest tranche of security assistance to date, approximately $2.9 billion. Later, the Defense Undersecretary for Policy, Colin Kahl, with some details at the Pentagon.
Let me join President Biden and Secretary Austin in underscoring our continued support for the people of Ukraine as we mark their 31st year of independence. We are now 6 months into Russia's brutal, premeditated invasion of Ukraine, an act of aggression meant to undermine that independence. Russia's efforts have not succeeded and will not succeed. And as we have made clear at every level of this administration, we are committed to sustained security assistance as Ukraine defends its sovereignty and territorial integrity. We are with Ukraine today, and alongside our allies and partners, we will stick with Ukraine over the long haul. In light of this enduring commitment, the Department of Defense has decided to provide an additional $2.98 billion in security assistance to Ukraine under the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, or USAI. As you all are aware, this is the largest single security assistance package we have ever provided to support Ukraine. In previous briefings, we've discussed various Presidential Drawdown Authority packages, or PDA packages. It's important to note that USAI is different from Presidential Drawdown because we will be procuring these systems under USAI from the private sector rather than pulling them out of our own stocks, which is what we do with PDA. By its very nature, this USAI package underscores our commitment to supporting Ukraine for the long term, representing a multi-year investment in critical defense capabilities. This package is about building enduring strength for Ukraine as it continues to defend its sovereignty in the face of Russian aggression. Vladimir Putin seems to believe that Russia can win the long game, outlasting the Ukrainians in their will to fight and the international community's will to continue to support Ukraine. This USAI package is a tangible demonstration that this is yet another Russian miscalculation. The capabilities in this package are tailored to sustain Ukraine's most critical capability needs in the medium to long term, and they include 6 additional National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, or NASAMS, with additional munitions for those NASAMS, up to 245,000 rounds of 155 millimeter artillery ammunition, which is the ammunition used for the NATO standard artillery systems that have been transferred to Ukraine, up to 65,000 rounds of 120 millimeter mortar ammunition, up to 24 counter-artillery radars. We're also including in this package Puma unmanned aerial systems, or UAS, and support equipment for Scan Eagle UAS systems. We're including Vampire counter unmanned aerial systems, laser-guided rocket systems, and a substantial funding package for training, maintenance, and sustainment so that Ukraine can keep the equipment they already have in the fight. Deliveries of this USAI package will begin in the next several months and continue over the coming years. While many of these capabilities are not intended to directly contribute to today's fight, they will form the backbone of a robust future Ukrainian force capable of defending Ukraine for years to come.
Colin Kahl, Defense Undersecretary for Policy in the Pentagon briefing room. He says that this nearly $3 billion more in aid to Ukraine brings the total U.S. aid to that country to $13.5 billion in the past 6 months. United Nations Security Council holding its third meeting in 3 days about the war in Ukraine. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres just returned to the UN in New York City after a visit to Ukraine, telling the ambassadors about the devastation from 6 months of war.
Today marks a sad and tragic milestone. 6 months since Russia's 24th of February invasion of Ukraine. During this devastating period, thousands of civilians have been killed and injured, including hundreds of children. And countless others have lost their family members, friends, and loved ones. The world has seen grave violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law committed with little to no accountability. And millions of Ukrainians have lost their homes and their worldly possessions, becoming internally displaced or refugees. With the onset of winter, humanitarian needs continue to rise rapidly, with millions of people in need of assistance and protection. As these needs skyrocket, it is imperative that humanitarian actors in Ukraine have safe and unhindered access to all people who require assistance, no matter where they live. Mr. President, the consequences of this senseless war are being felt far beyond Ukraine. We are seeing new vulnerabilities emerge in a global environment already worn out by conflicts, inequality, pandemic-induced economic and health crises, and climate change, with a disproportionate impact on developing countries. The acceleration of already high food, fertilizer, and fuel prices has triggered a global crisis that could drive millions more into extreme poverty, magnifying hunger and malnutrition, while threatening to raise the global humanitarian caseload to new highs and erase hard-won development gains. Vulnerable communities are grappling with the largest cost of living crisis in a generation, and high commodity and transportation costs are having major repercussions for existing humanitarian operations.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres at today's UN Security Council meeting in New York City on Russia's war in Ukraine. From the Washington Post, Ukraine celebrated its Independence Day on Wednesday on the 6-month anniversary of Russia's invasion at a muted ceremony in the capital, Kyiv. President Volodymyr Zelensky placed flowers at a war memorial and took part in a multi-faith service. He warned that Moscow could step up its attacks, even as he hailed the courage of Ukrainians in the face of Russian aggression. President Zelensky also addressed today's UN Security Council meeting remotely. That was over the Russian ambassador's objection that speeches must be made in person. We'll hear from the Russian ambassador in just a moment, but first the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, promising the U.S. will not let up in its commitment to help Ukraine defend itself.
Today marks 6 months of Russia's premeditated, unjustifiable, and brutal full-scale war against Ukraine. Just 6 months since we, sitting here in the council chamber, watched as Russia, serving in the presidency, attempted to defend the indefensible. 6 months of Russia's defiance of the international community. 6 months of Russia's flagrant lies and disregard for international law, including violations of the UN Charter. 6 months of attacks by Russia, killing Ukrainian civilians and destroying civilian infrastructure. 6 months of devastation and missile strikes that have torn apart families and stolen the lives of too many, like the life of 4-year-old Lisa Dmitrieva, killed last month in a missile strike that left 24 people dead. 6 months of horrific atrocities, including rape, murder, and torture in towns like Bucha and Irpin and others. 6 months of families being separated and millions displaced. 6 months of killings, thousands dead. 6 months later, Russia's goal is as clear as ever: to dismantle Ukraine as a geopolitical entity and erase it from the world map. Russian disinformation campaigns are increasingly being weaponized to prepare for further attempts to annex Ukrainian territory. Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs Lavrov publicly acknowledged this as one of the Kremlin's objectives. Specifically, Russia is laying groundwork to attempt to annex the regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia and all of the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. Let's be clear. The international community will never recognize Russia's attempt to change Ukraine's borders by force. And when the world's leaders come to New York next month to reaffirm their commitments to the UN Charter, they are also reaffirming their support for that basic principle. So no matter how many more sham referendums, illegitimate authorities Moscow tries to install, we will continue to defend the UN Charter and uphold Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence. And as we discussed yesterday, Russia is responsible for creating another grave risk to another core commitment by the international community to nuclear safety.
The U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, speaking at today's UN Security Council meeting on Russia's war in Ukraine. The Russian ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, telling the Security Council the same thing that Russia has said now for 6 months of war. Russia's not to blame.
We have predictably heard plenty of mantras about Russian aggression. As we have already said, over the past 200 years, no other explanation for European security issues except for references to Russia's actions has emerged in the West. Today, we also heard many claims about the catastrophic consequences of 6 months of hostilities for the civilian population of Ukraine. No one is arguing that it is difficult for Ukrainians today. However, the responsibility for this lies with the Kiev regime, which came to power in 2014 as a result of an anti-constitutional coup carried out with the help of a number of Western states. From the very beginning, the new Maidan authorities have been steadily leading the country to disaster, choosing the path of Russophobia and the glorification of Nazi criminals. Thus, according to the most conservative estimates, more than 60% of the population of Ukraine was deprived of the opportunity to realize their Russian-speaking identity, contrary to all relevant international conventions and Ukraine's obligations. Their Western backers, blinded by the geopolitical goal of weakening Russia, made it clear from the beginning they would cover up any crimes committed by the Kiev authorities and turn a blind eye to things that they would never allow in their own countries.
Through an interpreter, the Russian ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, you can find today's full UN Security Council. We have it archived at our website at cspan.org. This from AP out of Kyiv. Russian forces Wednesday launched a rocket attack on a Ukrainian train station on the embattled country's Independence Day, killing 22 people. President Volodymyr Zelensky said after warning for days that Moscow might attempt something particularly cruel this week. Also, the outgoing British Prime Minister Boris Johnson making a surprise visit to Kyiv today on the anniversary, saying that Ukraine, quote, can and will win this war. According to the independent newspaper in Great Britain, which writes, the British Prime Minister added his belief that Ukraine could soon retake territory, citing the morale of Ukrainian soldiers, which he said was leagues ahead of their Russian peers. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, U.S. military and economic aid support flowing to that country, the U.S. government has been on guard for possible Russian cyber attacks on critical infrastructure within the United States. The director of the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, Jen Easterly, spoke about this today.
I'm excited because I think next week we're going to roll out our CISA strategic plan, which is our first one. We are the newest agency in the federal government, and so excited to really get that started in terms of how do we build the agency that America deserves. And a lot of that is going to be focused on how are we reducing risk to the nation and driving resilience, but also how we're building one CISA. Yep. As you know, as folks in this room may know, we came off the back of a staff element and one that was sort of pieced in parts together. And now we are really building one holistic agency to focus on both the cyber threats and the physical threats to the critical infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day. So a lot of work going on in that space. Even as you know, Kelly, we have a very dynamic threat environment. It's not lost, I think, on anybody in this room that it is Ukraine Independence Day. And 6 months since the unprovoked invasion by Russia. And certainly we have been concerned about potential threats from Russia or state-sponsored or criminally aligned groups on our critical infrastructure. And that's why we've been talking about Shields Up, the importance to all of our critical infrastructure owners and operators. And, you know, frankly, this really is the new normal that we need to focus on threats across the board. So really important work.
The CISA director, Jen Easterly, at a summit that focused mostly on chemical infrastructure security, held in Arlington, Virginia today. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to you every day. You can subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.